There's a kind of hush that settles over Lumpy Ridge in Colorado. It was October 2025 cool, sunny, and we were working our way up that steady climb. The Park Service calls it a moderate hike, about 3.5 miles round trip with roughly 800 feet of gain. What happened next became the axis my life spins on. A sudden hand at my back. A stumble, the scrape of boot on granitan, then rock. Sky and silence. When I came to on a ledge below, blood in my mouth and everything ringing. Tom leaned close and whispered, "Play dead." Why would a son and his wife walk behind their parents on a blue sky Saturday and choose the worst version of themselves? It didn't end on that ledge or under fluorescent lights with a blood pressure cuff biting my arm. It stretched into an investigation that reached all the way to a church potluck on Wonderview. The granite steps up Gem Lakes Trail always make my knees announce my age. Even if my pride shows up pretending I'm still the woman who used to race Tom up. These switchbacks for the right to pick the picnic spot. Back when Michael was small enough to ride on his father's shoulders, and Kelsey was just a name I'd only heard in other people's families, not my own. Saturday, October 4th, 2025. Started with that sharp fall light slicing over Prospect Mountain and the Stanley's white bones shining on. Wonder View like a memory that always wants to be seen. The whole town polished for leaf peepers and the elk that ignore crosswalks like they pay the taxes around here. We parked at Lumpy Ridge early enough to dodge timed entry headaches. Though this shoulder season tends to give locals a little grace, and I did my habit count the water, check the snacks, double tie laces. Kiss 2 fingers to the trail sign like that'll change anything. Tom squeezed my hand, 1, 2, the way he always does, and Michael, our son, grinned that sheepish grin he uses when he's about to ask for something and pretend it's the first time. It's crossed his mind. Kelsey was all high ponytail in Patagonia, eyes hidden behind big sunglasses, even though the shade between the boulders makes its own kind of dark dot. We went up. The trail cut and climbed steady, stones placed like a staircase set by giants, and people find their rhythm or they don't. We found hours with pauses to watch chipmunks doing the Lord's work of keeping tourists entertained, and to catch our breath where the air thins quicker than thoughts. The views open in pieces Estes Park like a map under your feet. Long's Peak wearing its first October shrug of snow. And somewhere past that, a sky that promises change whether or not it's invited. I was cataloging colors because it comforts me. The rust of the scrub oak, the last yellow of aspen clinging to a draw. The granite's dependable gray and the bright blue lid on the day. Then the spur. If you've been, you know that spot where folks step off for a quick look down at town. Where the rock flares into a little shelf that tempts pictures and makes grandparents say things about being careful that grandchildren ignore. We were 4 shapes in a line, Tom ahead, me next, then Michael and Kelsey, who'd been whispering with that charged energy. I used to chalk up to marriage, but had recently started calling something more brittle in my head. I remember the crunch first. A little slip of gravel under someone's heel, a soft sound that shouldn't matter, but it did. A hand pressed into my back. It wasn't a guiding press. It had intent. It had a small, mean commitment to it, like deciding to close a door gently and then slamming it at the last inch. My foot slid. The shelf vanished. The blue sky tilted and the whole world became an edge and a choice I didn't get to make. Tom turned faster than a 70-year-old has any right to. He grabbed at me, missed, and in that same breath, like he'd been saving it for a moment he prayed would never come, he leaned over the noise and said, low and steady, "Play dead." It wasn't a plea. It was an instruction. It was a key he pushed into my hand with his eyes. I hit a ledge hard enough to knock everything bright to black for a heartbeat. Then another. Then the kind of dark that has shape to it. When thought came back, it came back in pieces. The smell of dust and sap. The rasp in my throat that meant I was trying not to cough. The slap of my pulse in my ears, and the scratch of something like panic wanting out. I kept still. I let my mouth fall open and my eyes stick half closed, the way deer do when they decide they're part of the meadow. Above me, voices too fast, too close to calm. Michael saying my name like he was practicing for the first time. Kelsey saying, oh God, and the edge in it more stage than prayer. Tom's voice was absent, which scared me more than anything. Until I heard the shuffle of him moving, careful, his breath loud enough to find if you loved it. A good trail reveals people. The ones who stop, the ones who help, the ones who film. I waited 4 feet for the crunch of another hiker rounding the switchback. For a voice calling down. But there was only the wind pulling at the edges of everything and a hawk scraping a line across the sky. Time did that trick it does on shock, stretching thin and then snapping back into minutes again. And my brain made lists to feel useful, hospital, wristband, questions. Sheriff's statements. Church casseroles. And then a thought that came in hot and sat in my chest like a coal. Why did Tom have that whisper ready? I took a breath. Silence. Curiosity is cruel. It makes the body want to turn its head even when every instinct says stay. I listened instead. Michael's voice hitched, then leveled in a way that sounded like a man building a story plank by plank. She slipped, he said, to no one and to the world. Kelsey added details that were too many for the moment and too few for the truth. A curiosity gap opened wide as the drop. What had they expected to happen next, exactly, and why did they think a mountain would keep their secret? The second gap sat closer to my skin. What had Tom known before we clipped the minivan doors shut and set our feet toward the rocks? When help came, it came with the choreography mountain towns never say out loud but know by heart. A hiker with a first aid kit and a calm voice. A call bouncing down to dispatch. The quiet professionalism that rides up with people who've done this part before. They ask for time and mechanism and if there was loss of consciousness. The same questions I'd hear again later under different lights. And I let my body stay limp even as my mind began to count backward from 4:26 p.m. Tucking the minute into a drawer I could open later for Sheriff Ruiz. Tom's hand found my sleeve. It stayed there, a small anchor in a big drop. They loaded me for the carry. Careful around shoulders and spine. Everybody speaking in those low voices people use when they want the air to stay steady. I didn't open my eyes until the stretcher tilted at the trailhead and the world flattened into parking lot and siren. And the taste of metal under my tongue. That's when I looked at my son. His face was a map I didn't recognize anymore. And that's when Tom leaned in close like he was going to kiss my cheek. And said a second thing I wasn't ready for. Later, the ambulance doors closed. The siren took the afternoon and tore it down the middle. The clock hummed. What was he going to tell me that could be worse than the shove? The answer waited under hospital lights and under something even harsher. Estes Park Health's emergency department sits low and brick red off Highway 36. With views of twin sisters peek through windows meant to calm people who arrive broken. And the intake desk smelled like hand sanitizer and the quiet panic every knows by heart. They wheeled me through automatic doors that hissed open like a confession booth. And the nurse Lynn tag said, with a sunflower sticker next to her name. Started the questions while stripping the blood pressure cuff Velcro in that ripping rhythm that means business. Name, date of birth, allergies, medications. What happened? When? Who's with me? And did I lose consciousness at any point? I said Eleanor Hart, November 12, 1956. Penicillin, blood pressure meds in the morning. I fell on Gem Lake Trail at 4:26. This afternoon my husband Tom's here, and yes, maybe, for a minute or two. The wristband went on white plastic with black print. My name reduced to a barcode and a number that would follow me. Through every test and every question that came next, Tom sat in the corner chair, the one they give family when there's not. Enough room, but too much worry to send them away, and his face had gone the color of old newspaper. Michael and Kelsey hovered in the hallway just past the curtain. Their voices a low hum of the same loop. She slipped. It happened so fast. We tried to grab her. It was terrifying. Lynn took Vital's pulse a little high, BP climbing from adrenaline. Oxygen good, temperature normal, and made notes on a tablet, while a doctor with tired eyes and steady hands checked my spine. My ribs, my pupils, asking me to track his finger and squeeze his hands and tell him where it hurt. Everywhere and nowhere, I said, which is the truth about shock. It spreads pain so thin it becomes a kind of static you can almost ignore until you can't. X-rays next, then a CT scan to rule out the things that kill slow and quiet, and through it all I kept my mouth shut about the shove because I didn't know yet what story we were telling or who was listening. By the time they rolled me back to the bay, the clock on the wall said 6:47 p.m. and the sky outside had gone the purple blue that October does best in the Rockies. The kind that makes you want to pull a quilt closer and believe the world's a kinder place than it is. Tom pulled his chair up next to the gurney, and his hand found mine again, calloused and warm and shaking just enough to betray him. I waited for the room to empty Lynn off to another patient, the doctor scribbling discharge notes at a rolling desk down the hall, and then I leaned in close. So close I could see the little scar over his left eyebrow from a fishing hook in 1992. And I said, "Why did you tell me to play dead?" His face did something I'd never seen in 35 years of marriage. It folded in on itself, like a letter being sealed before it's ready to send. "Not here," he said. Just that. 2 words. And then Michael stepped through the curtain with a pharmacy bag and a look that was trying too hard to be relieved, and Kelsey came behind him with her phone out, thumbs moving. Probably texting someone an update or a story or a reason. I let it go, for the moment. The doctor came back with paperwork. No fractures, significant bruising to the left side and shoulder. Possible mild concussion. Follow up with primary care in 3 days. Watch for dizziness, vomiting, confusion. Return if symptoms worsen. Here's a script for pain, ice, and rest. You're very lucky. Lucky? That word sat funny in my mouth. Like a stone you can't swallow and can't spit out. They discharged me at 7:34 p.m. And Michael offered to drive us home in our minivan while Kelsey followed in their Subaru, the kind of logistical kindness. That feels normal unless you're looking for the seam where normal splits. We lived on a quiet street off Moraine Avenue, a little ranch with blue shutters and a front garden I'd bullied into blooming every summer since 1998. Back when the town still felt small enough to know most faces at Safeway. Helped me. Inside, his hand under my elbow, and the gentleness of it made my stomach hurt worse than the bruises. Tom said we'd be fine, that we just needed rest, and Michael lingered in the doorway like he wanted to say something that didn't have words yet. And then Kelsey honked once from the driveway, and he left, the door clicking shut with a sound that felt too final for a Saturday night. Tom locked the deadbolt. He turned off the porch light. He stood in the kitchen with his back to me, shoulders tight. And the refrigerator hummed its little song about time passing, whether or not you're ready. I sat at the table, the same oak. Table we'd bought at an estate sale in Loveland 30 years ago. And I said, "Tell me now." He turned. The look on his face wasn't fear. Exactly. It was older than that. It was the look of a man who'd been carrying a bag of stones up a long hill and had just realized the hill had no top. "I've suspected something for months," he said, slow like every word cost him. "About Michael and the business. About money. About what he might do if he got desperate enough." I took a breath. Silence. The clock hummed. And then he said the thing that split the day in two before and after. "I think he's been planning this since July." What evidence had he been hiding? And why hadn't he trusted me with it until a cliff made him? Sheriff Dana Ruiz called Sunday morning at 8:16 a.m. Her voice carrying that particular blend of courtesy and steel that law enforcement perfects when they want facts without spooking witnesses. She said she'd gotten a report from the Park Service about an incident on Gem Lake Trail that she'd like to come by and take a statement. And would 10 a.m. work, or should she come later? I said 10 was fine, hung up, and stared at Tom across the coffee table while my ribs reminded me that breathing wasn't optional even when it hurt. He'd told me pieces the night before, after the Stones comment. Michael had been acting strange since summer, asking questions about the will and the cabin deed and whether Tom had ever updated the life insurance beneficiaries after I'd changed jobs in 2019. Questions that felt innocent at first. The way a splinter feels like nothing until it goes deep. Dana Ruiz arrived at 9:58 a.m. Precisely the kind of on time that makes a person trustworthy before they say a word. She was 55, compact, with graying hair pulled into a bun that looked functional rather than decorative. And she wore the Larimore County Sheriff's Office uniform like it was a second skin. She took off her hat, accepted coffee, declined sugar, sat in the armchair by the window, and pulled out a slim notebook and a pen that clicked once before she set it to paper. "Walk me through yesterday," she said. No preamble. Just the question. So I did. The parking lot, the trail, the steady climb, the views. The spur, the hand, the shove, the ledge. The whisper, the stillness, the voices, the rescue. The she wrote without looking up, her pen moving in quick, efficient strokes. And when I finished, she let the silence sit for a 3 count before asking, "Did you see who pushed you?" "No," I said. "I felt it, but I didn't see. And your husband told you to play dead." Not a question, a confirmation. "Yes." "Why would he say that?" Tom cleared his throat, the sound rough as gravel on a washboard. "Because I didn't trust the situation," he said carefully. "I thought if Eleanor stayed still, whoever was behind us might leave." Dana's pen paused. Her eyes came up, dark and measuring. "Whoever? Not your son and daughter-in-law." Tom looked at me. I looked at Tom. The space between us held 35 years and a truth we weren't sure how to hand over yet. "It was our son and his wife," I said finally. "But we can't prove they pushed me. It could have been an accident." "The trail's narrow there." The sheriff's expression didn't shift. But something changed in the air, a small tightening. Like the moment before a thunderstorm decides which way to roll, she asked for Michael and Kelsey's contact information. Their address: they lived in a condo complex off Fall River. Rodin whether there'd been any recent conflicts or tensions. Tom said there'd been disagreements about the family business, a small construction supply company we'd built from nothing in the 80s. and had been slowly transitioning to Michael over the last 5 years. Disagreements about what? Dana asked, and Tom said money, expansion, loans. The usual things that make family businesses into minefields. She made a note, then asked if we'd be willing to give statements separately. And we said yes, so she took Tom into the kitchen while I stayed in the living room with my coffee going cold and my mind running inventory on every look. Every comment, every oddness in Michael's behavior since the spring. When it was my turn, Dana asked the same questions in slightly different shapes. A technique meant to catch inconsistencies or hesitation. And I gave her the same answers because they were the only ones I had. Then she asked the one that stuck. "Mrs. Hart, do you believe your son tried to kill you yesterday?" I took a breath. Silence. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. Finally, I said, "I believe something happened on that trail that wasn't an accident. Whether it was my son's hand or his wife's or both, I don't know. But I felt intention. And my husband knew to tell me to play dead before we hit the ground. That's not a normal thing to know." Dana nodded once, a small dip of her chin that felt like solidarity or maybe just acknowledgement that the world holds more dark corners than most people want to admit. She said she'd be interviewing Michael and Kelsey later that day, that she'd follow up within 48 hours, and that we should call her directly if anything else came to mind or if we felt unsafe. After she left, Tom and I sat at the table and didn't say anything for a long time. Just listened to the house settle and the wind pick at the eaves. Finally, he said, "There's something else." Of course there was. There's always something else. Michael came to me in July, the week after the 4th, Tom said. He wanted to buy out my share of the business early. Said he had investors interested in expanding into Fort Collins and Loveland, but he needed full control to make it work. I told him I wasn't ready, that we'd agreed on a transition timeline through 2027. He got angry. Said I was holding him back, that the market wouldn't wait, that I was being selfish. I remembered that week. Michael had been short on the phone, skipped our usual Sunday dinner. And when I'd asked Tom if something was wrong, he'd waved it off as business stress. He asked about the cabin, too, Tom continued. The one on Lake Estes we bought in '95, asked if it was in the will, who'd it go to, whether we'd ever considered selling. I thought he was just planning ahead. Now I think he was measuring what he'd get if we were gone. A curiosity gap opened wide enough to walk through. What had Michael done between July and October to move from asking to acting? And had Kelsey been part of the plan from the start or pulled in later? The second gap sat colder. If Tom had suspected since July, what evidence had he gathered? And why hadn't we gone to the sheriff before the trail? "There's a lockbox in the cabin," Tom said quietly. "I put some things in there. Financial records. A recording I made on my old flip phone back in August when Michael came by the shop and didn't know I was in the back office." He was talking to Kelsey on speaker. They were talking about timelines and life insurance and how much they needed to clear their debts. The room tilted. Not from the concussion. From the weight of what he'd just laid out. "Why didn't you tell me?" My voice came out thinner than I wanted. "Because I hoped I was wrong," he said. "And because if I was right, I didn't want you looking at our son the way I'd started to." The clock hummed. Outside, a car door slammed. And somewhere on Elkhorn Avenue, the Sunday lunch crowd was making its way toward Kind Coffee and Ed's Cantina. Living normal lives where sons didn't push mothers off cliffs. What exactly was on that recording, and would it be enough to prove intent? By Monday morning, my body had decided to file a full complaint tribs, screaming. Shoulder bruised the color of storm clouds, and a headache sitting behind my eyes like a tenant who hadn't paid rent in weeks. Tom made eggs I couldn't eat and toast I picked at. and we moved around the kitchen in the careful choreography of people who just discovered the floor might open under them at any moment. At 11 a.m., Sheriff Ruiz called again. She'd interviewed Michael and Kelsey separately on Sunday evening. She said, and their statements matched too closely. In her professional opinion, like they'd rehearsed a script rather than recalled an event. Michael claimed he and Kelsey had been several feet behind us when I slipped. That he'd lunged forward to try to catch me but wasn't fast enough. That it happened in a blur, and by the time they got to the edge, I was already on the ledge and Tom was calling for help. Kelsey's version echoed his almost word for word, down to the phrase, "It happened in a blur," which Dana noted with the dry observation that trauma usually produces messy recollections, not matching ones. Dana asked if we'd be willing to let her access our financial records and Michael's, with consent or subpoena depending on cooperation, and Tom said yes without hesitation. Gave her the name of our accountant and the business lawyer, a man named Ed Grimes, who had an office on Moraine Avenue and a reputation for being thorough to the point of tedium. She also asked about the cabin and the lockbox, and Tom said he'd bring her the key and the contents by end of day. After we hung up, he disappeared into the bedroom and came back with a small steel box. Maybe 8 by 10 inches, the kind you'd buy at Walmart and forget about until you needed secrets kept. Inside, a manila folder with printed bank statements, a photocopy of the business partnership agreement from 1986, a handwritten ledger and Michael's scrawl showing deposits and withdrawals that didn't match the company books, and a silver flip phone that looked like an artifact from 2008. Tom plugged the phone into an old charger he'd kept in a junk drawer because Tom kept everything Anded powered on with a sad little chime. He navigated 2 voice memos, clicked one labeled August 14th, and hit play. The audio was muffled, scratchy, the kind of quality that makes you lean in and hold your breath. Michael's voice came through first. "I'm telling you, if we wait any longer, the creditors are going to come after the house. We're $140,000 in the hole, Kels. The expansion loan's due in November. And Dad won't budge on buying me out early." Kelsey's voice sharper. "So what do we do?" "We can't sell the condo. It's underwater. Your parents aren't going to just hand over the cabin or cash out the insurance." A pause. The sound of something scraping, maybe a chair, maybe nerves made audible. Then Michael, quieter. "There are ways to accelerate an inheritance. People have accidents, especially older people. Hiking, driving, whatever. It happens all the time." Silence on the tape. Silence in the kitchen. My hands had gone cold. Kelsey's voice again, uncertain. "You're not seriously suggesting." "I'm suggesting," Michael interrupted, "that we need options. And if something happened, we'd be the primary beneficiaries. The business, the cabin, the life insurance, it's all set up that way. Dad updated the will back in 2019, remember? I saw the documents when Mom had that health scare." More silence. "Then Kelsey, I can't think about this right now." "And Michael, you don't have to think. You just have to not get in the way when the time comes." The recording ended. Tom clicked the phone off. The kitchen felt too small and too quiet, like the walls had leaned in to listen and decided to hold their breath. "That's August 14th, I said. My voice, somebody else's. 2 months before the trail. "Yeah," Tom said. I recorded 3 more conversations after that. All the same theme. They needed money. I was the obstacle. And eventually the obstacle had to move. I thought about Michael as a boy, skinny and serious. The kind of kid who built elaborate Lego cities and cried when the dog knocked them over. I thought about the summer he was 12 and broke his arm falling out of the apple tree behind the cabin. How Tom carried him a mile to the car because the trail was too rough for walking wounded. And how Michael had said, "Thank you, Dad," over and over until the morphine at the ER finally made him sleep. I thought about his wedding to Kelsey in 2015. A small ceremony at St. Andrew's Episcopal on Wonderview Avenue. How he'd teared up during the vows, and I'd thought, this is a good man. This is my son, and he's going to be fine. Somewhere between that wedding and this kitchen, something had bent in him. Or maybe it had always been bent, and I'd been looking at the angle that hit it. What happened to the business? I asked, how'd he rack up $140,000 in debt? Tom sighed, and the sound carried 30 years of sawdust and receipts and early mornings at the supply yard. He took out a loan last year to expand inventory and open a second location in Loveland, he said. I advised against it, told him the market was softening. Fractors were skittish with interest rates climbing, but he insisted. Said he had it under control, that he'd done the research. Then material costs spiked. The Loveland lease fell through because the landlord sold the building. And he couldn't unload the inventory fast enough. The loan payments started eating him alive. He came to me in May asking if I'd co-sign a consolidation loan. I said no. I told him he needed to close the second location idea, cut losses, and rebuild slow. He said I didn't understand modern business, that I was stuck in the 80s. A curiosity gap cracked open. Had Michael tried other solutions between May and August? Okay. And at what point had Kelsey become complicit instead of just a worried spouse? Tom stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where the last of the asters were fading into October brown. I kept hoping he'd figure it out, he said to the glass. That he'd sell the condo, downsize, ask a bank for better terms, something other than this. I kept thinking if I just gave him time, he'd come to his senses. Instead, he came to a trail, I said. Tom nodded. The clock hummed. Outside, a blue jay screamed at something only it could see. We put the lockbox in a canvas grocery bag, drove to the sheriff's office on Community Drive, and handed over every piece of evidence Tom had collected, along with a timeline and a signed statement authorizing a full financial investigation. Dana listened to the August 14th recording twice, her face unreadable, and then said the words that made it real. This gives me probable cause for a deeper look. I'll get a warrant for their financial records and phone data. In the meantime, do not contact Michael or Kelsey. Do not post anything on social media, and if they reach out to you, document it and let me know immediately. We drove home in silence. The mountains looked the same as always, indifferent and eternal, which somehow made the whole thing worse. What would the phone data reveal about the days leading up to October 4th? And had they rehearsed the push the way they'd rehearsed their alibi? Wednesday brought rain, the cold, slanting kind that makes Estes Park look like a postcard someone left out in the weather. And I spent the morning on the couch with ice packs and ibuprofen while Tom paced the house, checking his phone every 12 minutes. Sheriff Ruiz had said she'd follow up by midweek, and midweek had arrived with clouds and waiting. At 2:47 p.m. she called. "I've got the warrant," she said without preamble. Michael's bank records show multiple cash withdrawals in September's small amounts. $200 to $500, always just under reporting thresholds. Totaling about $3,800. Kelsey's phone has deleted messages. But our tech was able to pull some fragments from backups. One from September 29th says, "Are you sure Saturday's the right day?" Another from October 2nd, "Trail or road?" We're building a case, but I need more. The audio from August helps establish motive. But a defense attorney will argue it's just venting, not planning. Do you have anything else? Documents, witnesses, anything that shows premeditation? Tom's face went pale. There might be something at the cabin, he said slowly. A letter. I found it in Michael's jacket pocket back in September when he left it at our house after dinner. I didn't think much of it at the time. Thought maybe it was a draft he'd forgotten. But now he trailed off. Dana's voice sharpened. What did the letter say? It was addressed to Kelsey, Tom said. Handwritten? It talked about timing and opportunity and how they'd have to be careful with the staging so it looked natural. I took a photo of it on my phone and put the original back in his jacket before he came to pick it up. I didn't want him to know I'd seen it. Silence on the line, the kind that hums with a dozen thoughts sorting themselves into words. Send me that photo, Dana said. And if there's anything else, anything at all, now's the time. Tom pulled up his photos. Scrolled back through weeks of snapshots, garden blooms, a sunset over Long's Peak, a blurry shot of a mule deer in the yard, and found the one from September 18th. He forwarded it to Dana. And within 30 seconds, she called back. This is good, she said, and I could hear the edge of something like satisfaction in her voice. This is very good. It references the trail specifically, talks about making sure there are no other hikers nearby, and mentions October. Combined with the audio and the text fragments, we're building a conspiracy case. I'm going to bring them in for formal interviews tomorrow. Don't be surprised if you see some activity. She hung up. Tom set the phone on the table like it might explode. What have we done? He said, and I wasn't sure if he meant we'd just saved ourselves or condemned our son. That night, I couldn't sleep. So I made tea and sat at the table with the lights off, watching the rain bead on the window and thinking about timelines. Michael and Kelsey had been planning this since at least August, maybe earlier if you counted the debt accumulation and the questions about the will. They'd scouted the trail or road, suggested options, and picked October 4th. Our wedding anniversary, maybe thinking the sentimental hike would seem natural, would give them cover. They've chosen a spot where the drop was significant but not immediately fatal. A place where an accident would be plausible and rescue delayed. They'd practiced their story, matched their statements, played the role of horrified children. And it almost worked. Would have worked maybe if Tom hadn't whispered "play dead." If I hadn't stayed still long enough for them to show their hand. If Tom hadn't been recording and photographing and collecting evidence. Like a man building a case against his own blood, a curiosity gap stretched wide. What would Michael and Kelsey do when the sheriff came calling with questions they couldn't rehearse their way out of? And would one of them break first, or would they hold the line together? The second gap sat heavier. What would the legal process look like? And could we survive watching our son face charges we'd helped build? I took a breath. Silence. The clock hummed. Rain drummed the roof, a soft, relentless sound that felt like the world weeping or maybe just washing itself clean. Tom came out in his bathrobe, poured himself tea, and sat across from me without turning on a light. I keep thinking about that tree, he said. The apple tree. When he broke his arm. I know, I said. He said thank you, Tom continued. Over and over. Like he knew I'd do anything for him? You did, I said. And he was counting on that, Tom said, his voice breaking just enough to let the pain through. He was counting on us being too old, too trusting, too easy to erase. We sat until the tea went cold and the rain eased into drizzle. And somewhere in the dark, a question formed that I didn't want to ask but couldn't avoid. If Michael had succeeded, would he have grieved us or just cashed the checks? Thursday morning came gray and grudging, and at 9:15 a.m. Sheriff Ruiz texted, "In progress." We'll update soon. We waited. The house felt like a held breath. At 11:03 a.m., Dana called. Michael cracked, she said, and I could hear the weariness and the wind tangled together in her voice. Showed him the letter, played the audio, walked him through the text messages and the cash withdrawals. He tried to deny it, said the letter was fiction, that the audio was taken out of context. But when I told him Kelsey was in the next room and that whoever talked first would get a better deal, he folded. Admitted they'd planned it, said it was Kelsey's idea initially, but he'd gone along. Said they were desperate and scared and didn't see another way out. Kelsey's attorney shut her down before she said much, but Michael gave us enough. We're charging them both conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and fraud related to the business finances. They'll be arraigned Friday. The line went quiet. Then Dana said, softer, I'm sorry it came to this, Eleanor. Me too, I said, and hung up. Tom looked at me. I looked at Tom. The space between us held grief and relief in equal measure, and neither one felt like victory. What would the arraignment look like? And would we have to face them across a courtroom? By Friday, the story had leaked, the way stories do in a town the size of Estes Park, where the line between news and gossip is mostly a suggestion, and everybody knows somebody. Who knows somebody who works at the sheriff's office or the courthouse or the coffee shop where deputies grab their morning fuel? Our phones started buzzing before breakfast, friends. Neighbors, acquaintances we hadn't spoken to in years, all offering some version of shock, sympathy, or the thinly veiled curiosity that comes dressed as concern. Tom turned his phone off. I let mine go to voicemail and listened later to messages that ranged from genuinely kind to transparently nosy, deleting most and saving a few from people whose voices carried the weight of real care. The arraignment was set for 1:30 p.m. at the Larimer County Justice Center in Fort Collins. A 40-minute drive that felt longer under clouds that promised snow but delivered only cold. We didn't have to attend. Dana had made that clear, but Tom said he needed to see it. Needed to know it was real and not some nightmare he'd wake from with an apology on his lips. So we drove, the heater cranking against the October chill, past Mary's Lake and the turnoff to Glenhaven, through the canyon where the Big Thompson runs loud and fast even this late in the year, and into Fort Collins with its flat grid and college town. Bustle that always feels like a different planet compared to the mountains. The Justice Center sat blocky and modern on LaPorte Avenue. All concrete and glass and the kind of institutional efficiency that doesn't care about your story, just your case number. We checked in at security, passed through the metal detector, took the elevator to the third floor, and found seats in the back of a courtroom that smelled like floor polish and old. Arguments. Michael and Kelsey were brought in separately, each in county-issue orange jumpsuits, each flanked by a deputy and a public defender who looked too young to be holding anyone's fate. Michael's eyes found mine immediately, and the look on his face wasn't defiance or shamet, was something closer to disbelief. Like he'd just realized the plan had a consequence he hadn't budgeted for. Kelsey stared straight ahead, jaw tight, her ponytail gone in favor of a regulation bun that made her look smaller and older and nothing like the woman who'd smiled through Sunday dinners and asked me for my pie crust recipe last Thanksgiving. The judge, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and a voice that could cut granite, read the charges slowly, methodically, making sure every word landed. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Attempted first-degree murder, theft, fraud. She set bail at $500,000 each, noted the severity and premeditation, and scheduled a preliminary hearing for November 12th. Michael's lawyer argued for lower bail. cited his ties to the community, his lack of prior record, his cooperation with the investigation, but the judge wasn't moved. "Mr. Hart," she said, over her glasses with the kind of gaze that's seen every excuse and stopped believing in most of them. "You allegedly attempted to murder your parents for financial gain, and you did so with planning and forethought. Bail stands." The gavel came down, a sound like a door closing, and they were led out, Michael turning once to look back at us, his mouth forming words I couldn't hear and didn't want to. Tom's hand found mine, squeezed once, twice. And we sat through 2 more Ks, SUZA, DUI. A domestic dispute before we trusted our legs enough to stand and leave. On the drive home, Tom said, "I keep thinking we should have seen it sooner." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe we saw it and didn't want to name it." A curiosity gap opened. What had Michael and Kelsey expected would happen if they'd succeeded had they planned the grief performance, the funeral, the dividing of assets, or had they only planned as far as the push and hoped improvisation would carry them through? The second gap. What would the preliminary hearing reveal, and would more evidence surface in the weeks between now and trial? We stopped for gas in Lyons, the little town that always smells like river and coffee. And while Tom pumped, I went inside and bought 2 bottles of water and a bag of chips we didn't need, just to have something to do with my hands. The clerk, a kid maybe 20, with earbuds in and a name tag that said Jason, rang me up without making eye contact. And I was grateful for the anonymity, for being just another customer in a fleece jacket buying road snacks on a Friday afternoon back in the car. Tom said, "Dana called while you were inside. Left a message. She wants us to come by the cabin this weekend, help her verify the contents of the lockbox, and check for anything else that might be relevant." The cabin! We hadn't been there since late September, before the world tilted. Back when it was still just a place we went to fish and read and pretend the week's troubles could be left at the property line. It sat on a wooded lot off Lake Estes Drive, a small A-frame with green trim and a dock that needed new boards, but held steady enough for morning coffee and evening sunsets. We'd bought it in 1995 with money from a good year at the business, back when Michael was 12 and still believed his parents were the smartest people alive. The irony didn't escape me. The place we'd built as a family, retreat, had become the vault for evidence that might send our son to prison. Saturday morning we met Dana at the cabin at 10 a.m. The air sharp with the promise of winter and the lake mirror still under a sky scrubbed clean by yesterday's wind. She'd brought a deputy, a quiet man named Torres, who documented everything with a camera and a tablet hand. Together we walked through the small space. Main room with a kitchenette and a wood stove. Loft bedroom, tiny bath, screened porch facing the water. Tom opened the lockbox again, laid out the contents on the pine table, the financial records, the ledger, the phone, the photo of the letter. Dana examined each item, asked questions about dates and context, and then said, "Is there anything else? Papers, notebooks, storage bins?" Tom hesitated. I saw it in the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes flicked toward the loft. "There's a box up there," he said finally. "Old business files, tax records, some personal stuff. I haven't looked through it in years, but Michael borrowed the key once last summer. Said he needed to check a contract from the 90s for a vendor dispute." We climbed the narrow ladder to the loft, and Tom pulled a plastic bin from under the eaves. The kind you'd buy at Target and forget about until you move or die. Inside, file folders labeled by year, rubber-banded stacks of receipts, a few faded photographs, and tucked at the bottom a spiral notebook with Michael's handwriting on the cover. "Business! Plan 2024 to 2027. Dana opened it carefully. her gloves making soft sounds against the paper, and started reading. Her face stayed neutral, but after 3 pages she looked up and said, "This is a drafted buyout proposal. It's addressed to you, Tom." Dated July 8, 2025. It outlines terms for an early purchase of your share. But it also includes a second section titled Contingency Options. One of those options is labeled Inheritance Acceleration. There are notes about life insurance payout timelines, probate duration, and asset liquidity. Tom's face went gray. I felt the floor tilt. "He wrote it down," Tom said, his voice hollow. "He actually wrote it down like a business plan." Dana bagged the notebook as evidence, photographed the rest of the bin's contents, and told us the DA would likely use this in building the case for premeditation. We stood on the porch afterward, watching the light shift on the water. And I thought about all the summers we'd spent here, teaching Michael to skip stones and cast a line and gut a trout without flinching. Somewhere in the translation from boy to man, the lessons had bent. Or maybe they'd landed exactly as taught, and we'd just never imagined he'd apply them this way. Torres finished his documentation. Dana thanked us and said she'd be in touch before the preliminary hearing. And they left, the sound of their vehicle fading into the trees. Tom and I stayed, sitting on the dock with our feet dangling over the water that was too cold for anything but looking. And we didn't talk. Just let the quiet settle like sediment until the sun dropped behind the ridge and the first stars pricked through the dusk. What else had Michael written that we hadn't found yet? And was there a version of this story where we'd open the notebook in July and stop the whole thing before it started? The water lapped. The clock hummed. And somewhere in the dark, the question lingered. How do you grieve someone who's still alive but lost to you anyway? Monday morning, October 6th, brought a call from Ed Grimes, the business lawyer, who said he needed to meet with us about Michael's financial entanglements and the company's future. We met him at his office on Moraine Avenue, a small second-floor space above a gift shop that sold elk antler lamps and Skiz T-shirts that said Estes Park because breathing is overrated. Ed was 63, methodical, with a comb-over he'd committed 2 decades ago, and wire-rimmed glasses that made him look like a character actor playing a lawyer in a movie about small-town scandals. He laid out the situation in the flat. Careful language attorneys use when the news is bad but actionable. Michael had taken out the expansion loan using the business as collateral without Tom's full knowledge, forging a signature on one of the documents. The bank was calling the loan due $140,000 plus interest, Stan, if it wasn't paid by December 1st. They'd seize business assets. "Can we fight the forgery?" Tom asked. "Possibly," Ed said. "But it'll take time, and time's not on our side. The faster option is to pay the loan, restructure the business under your sole ownership, and cut Michael out entirely. Given what's happened, you have grounds to dissolve the partnership agreement for cause." Tom looked at me. I looked at Tom. 35 years of marriage teaches you to have whole conversations without saying a word. And we had one now. We nodded together. "Do it," Tom said. "Cut him out. Pay the loan. Save what's left." Ed made notes, said he'd start the paperwork, and warned us it would be messy. Michael would have grounds to contest, and any criminal case would complicate everything. But ultimately, the business was Tom's to control, given the partnership structure and the fraud. That afternoon, Sheriff Ruiz called with an update that made the day tilt again. We pulled security footage from a storage facility off Highway 34 North End, self-storage on Wildfire Road. She said. Michael rented a unit there on September 4th, paid cash for 6 months. The manager let us take a look this morning. Inside, we found maps of Gem Lake Trail with the spur marked in red marker. printed schedules of typical hiker traffic patterns by day and time, and a duffel bag with 2 life insurance policy folders and Tom's highlighted with payout amounts and beneficiary details. I sat down hard. The chair scraped against the kitchen floor, a sound like the world catching on something sharp. He was treating it like a project, I said, my voice flat. With research and planning and files. Yes, Dana said. And we're building a stronger case. I need you both to come to the station tomorrow morning, Tuesday the 7th. At 9 a.m., we'll go over everything before we bring formal charges. A curiosity gap opened. What else was in that storage unit? Had Michael practiced statements? Rehearsed grief stored anything else that would show just how deep the planning went. That night I couldn't sleep, so I made tea and sat at the table with the lights off, watching the reflection of the porch light on the window and thinking about timelines. Michael and Kelsey had been planning this since at least August. Maybe earlier if you counted the debt accumulation and the questions about the will. They'd scouted the trail and picked October 4th-hour wedding anniversary, maybe thinking the sentimental hike would seem natural, would give them cover. They'd chosen a spot where the drop was significant but not immediately fatal. A place where an accident would be plausible. And it almost worked. Tom found me at dawn on Tuesday, still in the chair, the tea long cold. He didn't say anything. Just pulled up the other chair and held my hand while the light crept over Prospect Mountain and turned the world from black to gray to the pale gold of a new day we hadn't asked for but had to live anyway. The clock hummed. At 8:15 a.m. we got ready to head to the sheriff's office. And I realized this was just the beginning of the investigation. The charges, the legal process would stretch for months, maybe years ahead of us. But for now, for today, Tuesday, October 7th, all we had to do was show up, tell the truth, and let the system do what it's built to do. The question remained, how do we live with this, day after day, knowing our son tried to erase us for money? Tuesday morning, October 7th, we drove to the sheriff's office on Community Drive at 8:45 a.m. 15 minutes early because Tom's always been the kind of man who thinks late is a moral failing. The building sat low and brick, with a Larimore County seal by the entrance and a parking lot that smelled like cold asphalt and pine. Dana Ruiz met us in the lobby, led us to a conference room with gray walls and a table scarred by years of coffee cups and hard conversations, and laid out everything they'd compiled in the past 3 days. The storage unit photos were spread across the table like an autopsy of intent. The maps, the schedules, the insurance folders, a notebook with timeline calculations. And this one hit like a Vista-printed article about falls in Rocky Mountain National Park, with a passage highlighted about survival rates from drops of 15 to 30 feet depending on landing surface. He researched how far he could push you without guaranteeing death, Dana said, her voice clinical. He wanted it to look survivable from a distance, like bad luck rather than murder. The highlighted section talks about ledges and how victims of accidental falls often survive if they land on an outcropping within that range. I took a breath. Silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Tom's hand found mine under the table, and I held on. Dana continued. We've also recovered deleted text messages from Kelsey's phone. One from September 29th says, "Are you sure Saturday's the right day?" Another from October 2nd, "Trail or road?" And one from October 3rd, the night before, "Weather looks clear. Last chance to back out." Michael's reply, "Too late. We're $140,000 down." This is the only way. She played the August 14th recording again. The one where Michael talks about accelerating an inheritance and how older people have accidents. And this time hearing it in the context of everything else, the maps. The texts, the highlighted article made it impossible to dismiss his venting. "We're arresting them today," Dana said. "Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and fraud." The DA's reviewing the case this afternoon, and they'll be arraigned tomorrow. Wednesday, October 8th. I need you to be prepared for this to become public. Estes Park's a small town. The story will spread. Tom nodded. I said, "Do what you need to do." My voice sounded like someone else's. Like I'd borrowed it from a woman who knew how to be strong when her world was ending. Donna asked if we wanted to be present for the arrests. And we both said no, we didn't need to see Michael and Kelsey in handcuffs to make it real. It was already real enough. She walked us through what would happen next. The arrests would take place this afternoon around 2 p.m. The arraignment tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the Larimore County Justice Center in Fort Collins. Bail would be set, and then the preliminary hearing would likely be scheduled within 2 weeks, where we'd have to testify. "This will be hard," Dana said, looking at us both with something that wasn't quite pity but was close to understanding. "Testifying against your son, watching this play out in courts, going to hurt in ways you can't prepare for. But you're doing the right thing. You're staying alive and you're making sure he's held accountable. That matters." We left the sheriff's office at 10:27 a.m., the morning sun bright and indifferent, and drove home through town where people were going about their Tuesday routines, tourists buying postcards on Elkhorn Avenue, locals grabbing coffee at Kind, a group of high schoolers laughing outside the ice cream shop, and I felt the dissonance of it. How our world had shattered while everyone else's kept turning. A curiosity gap opened. What would Michael and Kelsey do when the deputies showed up with warrants this afternoon? Would they resist? Would they cry? Would they finally show something real? The second gap sat heavier. How would we survive the months ahead, the arraignment, the preliminary hearing, the trial if it came to that tand? What would we become in the process? We got home at 10:55 a.m. and Tom made sandwiches we didn't eat while I sat at the table staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring with news of the arrests. At 2:34 p.m., Dana texted, "In custody. Both. No issues. Arraignment tomorrow, 10 a.m. if you want to attend." I showed Tom. He read it, nodded once, and said, "We'll go. We need to see it through." So that's where we are now, Tuesday afternoon, October 7th, 2025, sitting in a house that feels too quiet and too full at the same time. Waiting for tomorrow, waiting for the next thing. Waiting to figure out how to live in a world where our son is in jail and we're the reason why. The clock hums. The mountains hold their places outside the window, indifferent and eternal. And somewhere in a cell tonight, Michael will sleep or won't sleep, and I'll do the same. And in the morning we'll get up and do it again. Because that's all there is. The next breath, the next hour, the next day. The story doesn't end here. It's just beginning. But for today, for this moment, we're still standing. And that's enough. Tomorrow, Wednesday, October 8th, we'll wake before dawn. Dress in clothes that feel like armor and drive to Fort Collins for the arraignment. We'll sit in a courtroom and watch our son and his wife stand before a judge in orange jumpsuits. And we'll hear the charges read aloud. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Attempted first-degree murder, theft, fraud. The judge will set bail probably high. Maybe $500,000 each given the severity and premeditation. And schedule a preliminary hearing for later this month. Michael's eyes will find mine. And I don't know what I'll see there. Remorse, anger, disbelief. Or just the hollow look of someone who gambled everything and lost. The preliminary hearing will come next. Probably within 2 weeks, and that's when we'll have to testify. I'll sit in the witness box and describe the push, the fall, the whisper. And I'll have to do it while Michael watches from the defense table. Tom will walk the court through the recordings, the letter, the storage unit evidence, and the financial motive. And he'll have to stay steady even though every word will cost him. The defense attorneys will cross-examine us, try to poke holes in our story. Suggest we're misremembering or exaggerating or motivated by greed ourselves. But the evidence is what it is: maps, timelines, insurance folders, text messages that say, "Last chance to back out." The night before they pushed us, if the judge finds probable cause and Kana says the evidence is strong enough that it's likely Michael and Kelsey will be bound over for trial. That could take months, maybe a year. Before jury selection and opening statements and the whole machinery of justice grinds through our lives, there might be a plea deal offered along the way. The DA might negotiate to avoid trial, and Michael and Kelsey might take it to reduce their sentences. Or they might fight, insist it was an accident, force us through a trial where every private moment becomes public record. I don't know which outcome I'm hoping for. Both feel like losing in different ways. What I do know is this: we'll survive it because we don't have another choice. We'll show up to every hearing, every court date, every moment the system requires us to relive the worst day of our lives. And we'll do it because the alternative is letting them get away with it. And that's not something I can live with. Tom will hold my hand in courtrooms and conference rooms, in quiet moments at home when the weight gets too heavy. We'll lean on the few friends who've stuck by us and learn to live without the ones who couldn't handle the mess. We'll rebuild the business or sell it, clear the debt, and figure out what the rest of our lives look like when the center has been ripped out. And somewhere in the middle of all that, between the legal motions and the sleepless nights and the testimony that cuts like glass, we'll have to decide what forgiveness means when the person who hurt you is your own child. I don't have that answer yet. Maybe I never will. Right now, all I can do is what I'm doing, sitting at this table on a Tuesday afternoon in October, telling this story to make sense of it, to get it out of my body and onto something outside myself so it doesn't eat me alive from the inside. Tom's in the other room, on the phone with Ed about the business paperwork. His voice low and steady, even though I know he's breaking in the same slow way I am. Outside, the aspens are turning gold, the way they do every fall, indifferent to human drama, just doing what they've always done. A curiosity gap remains, one that might never close. Will Michael ever truly understand what he did? Will he lie awake in his cell and feel the weight of it? Or will he always find a way to justify, to blame, to make himself the victim in his own story? I don't know. Can't know. Can only choose every morning to get up and keep going. To let the sunrise be enough of an answer when the questions get too heavy. Tomorrow, we'll drive to Fort Collins and watch our son be arraigned. Next week or the week after, we'll testify at the preliminary hearing. Months from now, maybe there'll be a trial, or maybe a plea, or maybe something I can't predict yet. But today's Tuesday, October 7th, 2025. At 3:47 in the afternoon, with the lights slanting low through the kitchen window, today we're still here. Still breathing, still choosing truth over silence. And that's going to have to be enough. It's almost evening now, Tuesday, October 7th. And the light's gone soft and gold the way it does in Estes Park when autumn starts to think about winter. Tom and I decided to drive out to the cabin on Lake Estes, just to sit somewhere that isn't this house with its too loud silence and its walls that feel like they're holding their breath. We made the drive in under 10 minutes, parked in the gravel turnout, and walked down to the dock where the water sits still as glass and reflects the mountains like a promise or a memory. I can't tell which. The air smells like pine and cold water. and the particular kind of clean that comes after something's been scrubbed raw. We sat on the edge of the dock, feet dangling over water too cold for anything but looking, and didn't talk for a long time. Sometimes silence is the only language that fits. Finally, Tom said, "You think we'll be okay?" And his voice was small, uncertain. The voice of a man who's just realized the map he'd been following his whole life doesn't work anymore. I said, "I think okay is relative. I think we're alive. I think we told the truth. I think that's enough for today." And I meant it. Not because I felt strong or sure, but because what else is there? You wake up, you make coffee, you face the thing in front of you. And you call that living because the alternative is giving up. And giving up means they win. The sun's dropping now, painting the sky pink and orange and that particular shade of purple that looks like a bruise healing. And I'm thinking about timelines, not the one Michael made in his storage unit with our deaths marked in red ink, but the one we're building now, hour by hour, choice by choice. Tomorrow we'll go to the arraignment. In 2 weeks, maybe sooner, we'll testify at the preliminary hearing. Months from now, there might be a trial, and we'll sit through that, too. And when it's finally over, when Michael's been sentenced and the courtroom empties and we walk back to our car in whatever season it is, by then we'll still have to figure out how to live with it. How to go to the grocery store and church and the post office in a town where everyone knows what happened. How to answer when people ask, "How are you?" with anything other than surviving. How to rebuild something that looks like a life when the foundation's been dynamited. I don't have those answers yet, but I have this: the sound of water lapping against the dock, the feel of Tom's hand in mine, the mountains holding their shapes against the sky, and the knowledge that we're still here when we weren't supposed to be. Michael's plan failed. Not because it wasn't thorough, it was terrifyingly thorough, but because Tom whispered, "Play dead," and I listened. And because we'd been married long enough that trust was a reflex, not a decision. That saved us. That and the evidence Tom had been quietly gathering because some part of him knew, even when he didn't want to, that our son had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. A curiosity gap will always remain. What was the exact moment Michael decided we were obstacles instead of parents? And could anything we'd done differently have stopped it? I'll never know. And maybe that's the thing I have to make peace with, that some questions don't have answers that satisfy. They just have the weight of themselves, and you carry that weight or you don't. But either way, it doesn't get lighter. Tom squeezes my hand. 1, 2. The signal we've used for 35 years, that means I'm here. I'm with you. We're okay, even when we're not. I squeeze back. The sun drops behind the ridge, and the sky goes from gold to gray to the deep blue that means night's coming. And we sit a little longer because there's nowhere we have to be and nothing we have to do except this: witness the day ending. Prove we're still here to see it. Eventually we'll stand up, walk back to the car, drive home. Make dinner or not make dinner, and get ready for tomorrow. Tomorrow with its arraignment and its orange jumpsuits and its judge reading charges that will make the whole thing real in a way it somehow still isn't. Not quite, not yet. But that's tomorrow. Right now it's Tuesday evening, October 7th, 2025, and I'm 68 years old. And my husband's 70, and our son tried to kill us 3 days ago, and we're still breathing. That's the story. Not the one I wanted to tell, not the one I ever imagined living, but the one I've got. The water holds the last light. The mountains hold their places. We hold each other. And tomorrow we'll get up and do it again. Because that's what survival looks like when you strip away everything else. You wake up, you face it, you keep going. The clock hums. The world turns. And we're still here.